All right, everyone, welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. This is Christian, your host, and today we've got Bill Nolan on the line. Bill's a PA guy like myself. I'm from Pittsburgh. You're on the other side of the state in the Philadelphia area, Lancaster, and fishing the Lehigh and a bunch of other great rivers out there for trout and smallie, etc. You grew up fishing spin rod. Made the transition to fly rod. I think, as I understand it, it was a trip to the Salmon River up in New York, fishing for probably some kings and whatnot. Give us a little bit on that, and then what we're going to do is dive into some of the elements that you really specialize in, and that's like, proficiency of multiple styles in fly fishing and why that's important, and especially fishing out of a boat scenario. And then we're going to dive in at the end of the show on some really specific areas to address mending out of a boat and how you can, use that to your advantage to not only get in the fish, but keep your line out of trouble and et cetera, and be proficient there as well. So, Bill, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So dive in here real quick. You had mentioned a story to me about going up to the salmon in New York and with some buddies, and that's how you got into fly fishing. Let's hear that.
Yeah, so I have a group of friends I grew up with fishing, and we're all spin fishing, and they were going up to Salmon River for a number of years, Salmon River, New York, and they kept telling me to come up, and finally convinced me to go up, and right away I got into a salmon, and it just took off, and it actually, that line cut right through my finger. And so once I got that in, I said, well, let me try one of them fly rods. And then they said, yeah, life will be a little bit easier for you here. And things just kind of took off from there. I just started going up there with them all the time. Saw a lot of crazy stuff up on Salmon River, a lot of fighting and all that stuff, combat fishing. Yeah, I've seen some nutty stuff up there. And it is what it is, that's salmon season up there.
Right.
Then I started, following guides and going to TU meetings. First meeting I saw was George Daniel, and from there it just snowballed. So yeah, that was a good trip up there. Actually saw one time a guy on a bet, someone took a salmon and slammed him in the head with it. And he won a free trip somewhere or something, but I wasn't going to do that.
Yeah, it is full-on combat fishing up there. It's a different scenario. If you haven't experienced it, it's certainly worth the experience. There's plenty of fish to go around, but there are elbow to elbows and emotions everywhere. And the dynamic between the gear guys and the fly guys. There's some fly-specific areas that are even busy as well. So there's a lot of population. And I see your hat. You work with Douglas as well. And have you been up to the Douglaston Preserve and fished that area as well?
I fished the DSR a number of times. They used to give us free passes to take the veterans up there for the fly fishing program that I ran for veterans. And then now I'm actually on the Douglas Pro staff. So I've been up there a number of times, and it's just really nice water up there. That's, the first couple miles or so of Salmon River coming in from the estuary, and it's a good company, good people, the good rods, and they're affordable.
Yeah,
and I have no complaints. Very happy with them.
Yeah. I've worked with them in the past. They're a great organization. Like you said, great people. One of the things that I really like about them is their warranty program.
Yeah.
I mean, if you break a rod tip or a section, they just send you one.
Yep.
And you got it in a couple days. It's really, in my opinion, one of the better warranty programs out there. And their Sky 9-weight is a absolutely awesome rod for saltwater, in my opinion. It's like right there, man, super fast, and just cuts that line, gets that line speed up real quick. And yeah, I've been happy with that rod for sure. So
yeah, I outfit my boats with Douglas rods.
Okay.
And all my clients want to use them, and then everybody likes them. So
yeah, it's good. Yeah, there's a lot of rods out there and a lot of great rods,
Yep.
and they're one of them. So I think it's always worth mentioning those kind of things. And the preserve and what they do for the community around that has been pretty awesome as well. So cool to hear that you've been able to participate in that quite a bit for a while now. You've been doing some of those veteran programs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's
good.
go. No, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to get into that if that's where I wanted to go.
Yeah. Dive into that a little bit.
So I was in a TU chapter and kind of got voluntold to help out with the veterans program. The first year I didn't run it. And then after that, I took over. No idea what I was doing. We built that program as a Trout Unlimited veteran service partnership. And this was Donneville Trout Unlimited in Lancaster. And we built it up to the point where during, starting in April through October, we would take the veterans fly fishing twice a month. And then in the winter months, we do fly tying, stuff like that, take them to the fly fishing shows. And it just kind of like we started traveling around the state. I ended up, the program was doing really well. Ended up making a lot of friends with different veteran organizations, Project Healing Waters, Rivers of Recovery. And I ended up being able to send some veterans on, all paid trips out to Montana, veteran couples to the upper Delaware, different stuff like that. And it was a really cool experience. Did that for a number of years. And it just helped facilitate to get another veteran on a trip out to Montana.
Nice.
Yeah. But I moved away from Lancaster. I moved closer to Jim Thorpe, PA. And so I help out now when I can. But, guiding takes a lot of my time.
Yeah. That's an awesome experience. I've done some of those programs, and it's very rewarding. It's a great way to give back to the community. So kudos to you for jumping in on that, man. And now you're in Jim Thorpe area. I mean, what an amazing place there. The mountain biking's incredible. The fishing's really good. There's like a lot to offer in that area.
Yeah, it's really a really pretty area. It's really different from Lancaster. And, you start getting into the Pocono Mountains and all that stuff. And then we have the Lehigh Gorge. Lehigh comes down the river or comes down the gorge and all that stuff. It's just a real pretty area. The whole rail trail system. We get a lot. It's a heavy tourist area. But there's a reason for that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Well, let's dive into the fishing aspect. One of the things that we wanted to cover today was, often on the show we'll focus in on specific proficiencies in fly fishing. So maybe it's just nymphing or etc. But you seem to be a pretty firm believer in. I think really the George Daniels mantra of learn as many styles as you can so that you can be efficient wherever you're at. So kind of dive into that and give us your thoughts there.
Yeah, so that's something that I always tell anybody that's getting into fly fishing, especially when they're first starting out. And I do like a fly fishing 101 class, or, I told the veterans. There's some guys that, they only want to throw streamers or only want to throw dries, and that's great. But you're limiting yourself when you're fishing, whether you're out on the drift boat or, wading. If you're only going to fish one style, you're passing up a lot of opportunities. If you're going out to throw dries and there's nothing rising or there's not a hatch, you're just standing there. And, I have some clients that, they want to predominantly throw dry. So we try to work on that. But, if nothing's popping, hey, let's throw some nymphs on here and see what we can do. Because if they're not feeding on top of the water, they're probably feeding below. So, and then same with throwing streamers. I mean, there's a time and a place for it. And on the Lehigh, we definitely have some spots where it's like, we need to throw streamers here, and conversely, there's different spots where like this is going to be some good dry fly water. And the more quivers you have, or the more arrows you have in your quiver, the better your chances are going to be on the river.
Yeah. So why don't you break down, let's do this. Let's imagine we're taking a trip down the Lehigh and kind of give us those three different scenarios, right? Of, hey, this is when I like to fish dry flies and it makes sense to me. And then maybe this is what I look for when I transition to a dry dropper or nymphing and streamer
Yeah,
fishing.
sure.
Let's just kind of walk through that. I think it'd be kind of interesting to hear that. And then we can also talk about maybe that on the Susquehanna as well, where you're targeting smallies and things like that.
Hmm. So what I do when I do a guide trip is before we get started, um, I explain the section that we're going to fish and how we're going to fish it, so it's not a surprise when we get there. The Lehigh has, it'll be a long run. We'll go through some riffles, and then there's another run, and each section is different than the previous one. So before we get to it, I want to have people set up and they know what we're going to do, so it's not a surprise when we get there. In the upper Lehigh, you're going to have some deeper water. There's definitely some spots where it's deep and you got to get down low. And there's not a lot of bugs up there. So that's where we're going to throw streamers, and we'll go over,
Okay.
we need to get down to those big fish. And then as we keep moving, we'll go through some riffles, different stuff like that. And then we might come upon a section where, okay, we're going to come off the streamer, and for this section, we're going to fish nymphs. And we'll do that for a while, whichever bank, and I let people know ahead of time which side we're fishing, how we're going to fish it. And then it's just the same thing. And then you come down to another section where you fish nymphs, and then we come down to like another section. There's a big, deep pool. And what I like to do in there is I anchor up at the head of the pool, and then we'll start casting streamers in there. And then I just start letting rope out very slowly. We'll get about 5-10 casts each side, and then I let some rope out, and we'll go through that till I get towards the end of the rope. I'll pull the anchor up, and then we'll do it again. And that way we completely cover that section with the streamers.
Okay.
And then you come down through, there's another section where there's the Popoco dumps in. So that's bringing in some fast water along the bank there. And there's some nice rapids in there. And I can't really stop the boat in there. So we're just chucking streamers hard. We're chucking streamers hard in there. And then after that, the river it kind of calms down some, and then that's kind of start to get into water where we're going to see some dry fly action, stuff like that, and we'll anchor up and cast to them. Once the water gets a little warmer, we start having our the tube hatch, as we call it here, with all the tubers and the whitewater folks and all that stuff, and try and pay attention to them and direct them to go around if we're casting some rising trout, stuff like that. And for the most part, everyone gets along on the river. The river belongs to everybody. So, it's a good time. And then, it's just pretty much the rest of the river is we're fishing dries and nymphs.
Okay. So let's start off with the streamer action for you. When your streamer set up, how are you typically managing getting down to the right depth, et cetera? Is that through your line or weighted streamers themselves? How do you like to manage that?
So the way I carry my rods on the boat is I have a dry fly rod, a nymph rod, and I have a streamer rod. And my streamer rods are 8-weight rods, full sink. And then I use the Kelly Gallup streamer formula. So it's 2 feet of 20 pound, 2 feet of 12. On my streamer on there I use the double surgeons, and I leave some space on there, and that way, because that streamer is getting down. When I'm throwing streamers, I need it to get down quick. And I have a lot of success with that, particularly if I have new guys coming on the boat, that they're coming from like a spin fish background, where, when you're casting like that, that you feel the line go off like that. So when you have that big streamer rod and you're throwing a big streamer, you're going to feel everything, and you're less likely to mess up your cast. So they have better success with that, throwing those streamers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. When you get that weighted line, it puts the energy into the rod, and you can feel it really quick. But, I always feel like a rock star when I'm casting those weighted lines.
For sure.
I'm like, yeah, man, I got this. And then you get back into your float line. You're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. You throw that all day long, you're going to be feeling it in your shoulder the next day.
Yeah.
So, I use it when it's appropriate.
And that's been my mentality too. I really like to use an unweighted fly if possible, and use the weight of the line to get down. It's a lot less kind of clunky from my
Yeah.
perspective. So one now you got next up is your nymph rig. Are you fishing with certain type of indicator or a certain length or setup of flies, etc.? Let's walk through that from the design standpoint.
So, with fly fishing, it's constantly a game of change and you're learning. And so this year I've kind of changed things up just a little bit. So I'm running a 9 foot 4X leader to a tippet ring. And then off of that, I'll run about 4 or 5 feet of 5X down to my first fly. And then from there, I'll tie on my second fly. Actually, I'll run the 4 or 5 feet, tie on a blood knot, and then leave about like that much room to my about 8 inches to my first fly. And I'll use that first knot for split shot so it doesn't slide down.
Okay.
And then
Yep.
after that, I'll tie on my dropper fly. And then for like indicators, what I use, I like those new Oros ones. They're pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm able to tell clients just loosen it up a little bit, slide it up or down. What?
They're the split
Yeah,
ones, is that?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. They work pretty
They
well.
work really good, and they don't pinch the line. So I've been having
Easy to
really
adjust.
easy to adjust on the fly, which is important, especially when we're going through the rivers that I'm fishing, where sometimes we need to change quick, need to change depth quick. So that's pretty much my nymph rig.
And are you tying off the bend for your second fly, or are you going up through the eye, or using a surgeon's?
I
How are
tie
you?
off the eye of the hook because I
Okay.
use barbless hooks, and if you don't,
Yep.
that second one is going to come
That's
pop
gone.
off.
Yeah. Okay. And then your depth wise, what are you looking for on depth on your nymph? Are you using the standard, 1.5 times
So that's what I
formula,
always tell
or
everybody. What we're going to start, tell everybody there's a bunch of rules in fly fishing, but they're more like guidelines. So we're going to start here. It's a place to start. And so we start about 1.5 times depth, and then we adjust from there. If we're dragging, if the fly is getting caught up too much, we're going to bring that a little bit closer. We'll drop it 6 inches closer to the fly. We'll adjust. We want those flies, on the bottom. We don't want them fishing up too high out of the out of the feeding column where they're going to be at. And and conversely, if I feel like if we're not grabbing every once in a while, then we need to bring that indicator up some.
yeah?
Being the guide, I already know where those need to be, but I also want the clients to learn as we're fishing. So I started at 1.5 times the depth, so they get to feel that whole process, to figure it out and see where it needs to be.
And on that learning side, are you like cluing the client to of like, hey, did you notice we haven't been ticking in a while? How do you kind of go about teaching in that element? I've had different experiences. I'm curious what your tactic is there.
So what I do is I do exactly what you just said. Does it feel like the fly's sticking to you at all on the bottom? If they say yes or no or whatever, and I know differently, I'll
Yeah.
grab the rod and we'll stop. I'll drop the anchor and I'll stop and I'll show them exactly what I want them to feel. Because sometimes
Okay.
you just don't know until you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we do that.
That's good. I like how you said I stop the boat and then I show them, because you can make a couple casts. Oh, okay, I throw a mend in here. Now notice when I threw the mend, did you see the tick, tick, tick after that or whatever it was? And they really get to observe it. And then it's like, okay, now let's start
Yep.
fishing. And you're knowing what to look for. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
want to blow through good fishing water if they're not doing what I need them to do to catch fish. I want them to catch fish. And if they're not set up right or whatever, we make sure we're set up before we get there. And that's no problem. If someone has an issue with their casting, whatever, we drop the anchor and we work on that until we get it down. So
Yeah, that's good. I like it. Last but not least, everybody's favorite, especially when they think about fly fishing, the dry fly.
Yeah.
Right? Most people, that's all they think fly fishing is, and you go, oh, really? That's only like 10% of the time that's the action. But talk about that. You guys have some prolific hatches out there, some beautiful fly fishing in the dry fly scenario. Give us an idea of like, hey, when I set up my rig, this is what I look for. This is when I add droppers. This is how I try to teach that scenario as well.
Okay, so it's everything's dependent on the client, their skill level, what they want to do, and all that stuff. But typically, I'll just run a floating line to. I use a 9-foot 5X leader. I don't need to go any smaller than that on the Lehigh. And then I'll just run that to my fly. And then I just work with the clients on. It's really important that when you spot a trout rising, you figure out the cadence of that trout, how often it's coming up. You don't want to blow your fly right through there, 1 second after they've risen when they're coming up every 30 seconds,
Right.
So I try to put the boat in a position where we're up above the fly or up above the trout, and we're kind of casting down at a 45. And I just always tell my clients, you want to cast about 10 feet up above where that's 5 to 10 feet above where that trout is rising. Because the trout's sitting in the water and they see something they like and they start dropping back, and that's when they come up and hammer it. So, anywhere, a couple feet below where you see them, that's where they're coming. That's where they're coming up to eat that fly. So we work on mending, and I just had a guy the other day that, all right, he was having a little bit of an issue with mending, but the fly was coming through, with a drag-free drift, and just leave it where it's at. Just leave it where it's at. We'll deal with the hook set if he comes up to take it. And he had a little bit of line. We were having a little bit of issue, but he got it. But just pull that line tight, set the hook. And, we had some success with that.
Yeah. When you said he was having trouble with mending, what was occurring? Were you were cross current?
Yep.
It sounds like couple different currents. But what was he having trouble with in that scenario?
So what he was having trouble with was trying to. So he had the fly coming down in one current, the fly line's in a different, faster current, so it's bringing it down, and you're getting that big bubble coming downstream. And then what that ends up doing is it ends up dragging that fly in it's in an unnatural drift.
In an arc.
So he was having a little bit of trouble mending up. And so once we got into that zone, that it was just, sometimes it is what it is. It's not a big of an issue for me if we're throwing a caddis, because they skitter across the water anyways. But when you're throwing a Baetis or, Hendrickson or whatever, once that's in that zone, then I tell them, don't move anything. Just let it go. Bring your rod down. It is what it is, and that's what we're going with. But ideally, when you have those different currents working, try and get that, mend upstream until you get right into that zone, and then you just bring your rod down with it, and you don't want anything to move at all. You want that fly coming through right at that exact time that you figure that he's about to come up again. And, set the hook, fish on,
Yeah, exactly. And when his mend in particular, was he dragging it or not getting enough lift? I'm curious to understand that side.
So the issue we were having there was when we were mending, it was mending a little too much, and it was pulling the fly out of the zone.
Okay.
And then
so he was getting real high, dragging the fly back upstream, getting it straight, laying the line down, but then it was pulled probably left of the zone if you're casting a right side, etc. And now you're going, that fish has to move 3 feet to the fish's right in order to get to that fly, and that's not going to happen. They're just going to stay in their own lane.
Browns,
they have to cross a current to do that or whatever.
With the rainbows, they'll move around a little bit more, but the browns, I find that they're staying in that lane. So if you pull it out of there, now you're scaring them. You might put them down for a little bit, and if we do that, we just take a couple extra seconds and see if they're going to come up again, see if they're going to rise for us. So you don't want to scare them, and that's why once it's in that zone, just leave it go. It is what it is, and we'll deal with it if we get them to come up.
Right. And you never know. Sometimes it could be a bad presentation.
Yeah.
You're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, but it
Yeah.
happened. So better off doing that than dragging it across and going, really putting the spook on them, I
Yeah,
think.
agree. I think that's one of the things people have problems with the dry flies is being able to mend line out, let line out without moving the fly. That takes a lot of practice, and that's worth going down to the river and just casting out and working on that, throwing that mend. And you're only mending to that first loop. Once that comes up, you mend that up and mend that up, and you're just letting line out until eventually that fly's about to come down into the zone, and then now it's go time, and we drift down with it and hopefully set the hook there.
Yeah. Working on that scenario where you go out, you make your first cast. A couple of things that I often see are, and I do it myself, is you make the cast and then you're like, that's not the cast, and you rip it out real quick. And you're better off leaving it there, maybe trying to make a couple mends, see how it goes, etc. And then the second element I always found really valuable is really thinking about how I'm going to let line out and how that works. And it's really, it's like the vacuum of the surface of the water that's like grabbing your line and pulling it through the guys, and you're just kind of snapping that little bit of slack out, and maybe it's a little twitch to the side or whatever. But being able to get to that ability through some practice, man, it'll make a huge difference in your fly or dry fly fishing.
That's just so important. I mean, that's even with nymphs, what you said about, you don't like the cast and ripping it out right away. Once it's in there, once it's out there, it's out there. If it's a bad cast or whatever, let it finish the drift. We don't want to, you're yanking it out, you're going to scare anything, within 5-10 feet. Just finish your drift, and more than once, you have that not great drift and you're getting ready to, pull it up, bam, something hits anyways,
Right.
So, but if you're slapping that in there and you don't like it, and you pull it back out and back in, you're creating a bunch of trouble for yourself there.
Right. You're spooking fish and you're ending up with the rat's nest.
Oh yeah.
Let me see that line real quick. Could you bring your rod tip back here? And you pull out the old jumble of line, like, oh man, here we go. Let's anchor up because we're gonna miss
Every
a good
once
section.
in a while, it's, you know what? I'm just throwing a new leader on. This is too much. As a guide, you got to recognize that. And usually, what I tell the guys is, if I see something pulled tight in there, a knot in there in the tip of it, anywhere in the leader, I'm just cutting it off and starting over because I'm not getting that out. So it happens sometimes. Sometimes poor casting. Sometimes the wind does get a hold of it. So it's fun.
That's part of fishing. Right. Well, let's do this. We're gonna wrap it up here with some of the mending techniques that we talked about. But apply them to the boat scenario. The majority of your fishing and guiding is out of the boat. You do some wade fishing, obviously, but there's a difference between understanding how to mend from a wade position and from a boat position, because you're all of a sudden a dynamic in the water. And I want to talk through that because it's something that I remember when I was starting to fish out of a boat, I thought, oh yeah, man, we got the boat. This is going to be awesome. But there's a lot that goes into it that, not only from a mending, but from an oarsman standpoint, can be really beneficial to know and understand.
Right. Yeah. So as a drift boat guide, it's my duty to put the fly fishermen in a position, to where they can make a good cast. I have to recognize their casting level. If it's not up to snuff, we stop and do a quick lesson or whatever. But once you can give me about 15 feet at least, away from the boat, then we're good to go. And say if we're nymphing, then I can control that where that indicator is at, by either slowing up, by forward rowing, or slowing down, back rowing. And we just try and keep that out at a 45-degree angle, out in front ahead of the boat. But sometimes, we're fishing, we're set up to fish a little bit deeper water. We're going through a run. I know we're going to go through some riffles and then we're going to get back into it. So we don't want to, I want to keep that fly in the water, but I don't want to get caught up. So what we'll do is we'll throw a big forward mend in that, let the current drag that all through the water. The flies are still in the water, and then that will bring us down through and back into the deeper water. And most of the time, you don't get hung up like that. And sometimes you do grab a trout in there. But you're definitely not going to catch anything if the fly is not in the water. And once you get back down to that the next pool, you mend back upstream, slow it down, and you want those flies leading the way.
Yeah, and so let's talk about what's happening there when you're floating and you start to get close to those riffles. You're putting a forward mend in, and when you put that forward mend in, that's bringing your indicator out front and allowing your flies to really drift long off the back. So you're changing the angle, which is therefore shortening your depth.
Exactly.
Right? And then when you get into the deeper end, you're basically saying, okay, as soon as my indicator crosses over into that shoal where the deep starts, it's probably a couple feet in or a foot in, you're saying throw a big back mend, because what that's going to do is bring the bobber back, allow the flies to sink and really come over that shelf, like boom, right where the fish are going to be sitting, and then stay at that depth through the deeper pool.
That's exactly what we do. And I'll just, I'll back row and let everything catch up and get back out where it needs to be. And then we continue on.
Yeah, and I remember when I was starting understanding that, like, oh, why is he wanting me changing this bobber? Or I'm scaring the fish? I didn't understand it. And it's all about the depth of the fly that you're managing there, and not necessarily. I always looked at it more so from a perspective of the dry fly scenario. Well, if I move my bobber, then I'm changing where my flies are moving around. Why would I want to do that? But didn't understand the whole depth end of it.
Yeah, it's just a little bit different out of a boat because you're moving the whole time, whether you're floating 5-10 miles. You're just constantly going to be facing different types of water, and you want your fly in the water as much as possible. So you use techniques like that to keep the fly in the water and to adjust to the different types of situations you're going to be in.
Yeah, and I like how you described it too, of it might not be ideal for that small section, but we're setting up for good drifts in other sections. So in a boat, because you are moving and it's that dynamic environment, you have areas where there's like sacrificial drifts, right? It's like, okay, I know where the good water is. So I might sacrifice here a little bit because I want to set you up for downriver, etc.
And that's what we do. With some of the riffles are only like 50 feet or whatever. I want to keep that fly in the water. That's why we'll throw that forward mend in there. We'll go through that, and at least we have it in there. And hopefully we can pick something up while we're there. And then when we get down to where we want to be, back mend, and we're good to go.
Yeah, that goes back to the old scenario. I remember one of the better pieces of advice I got from a local guy here, Lance Egan. He's a competitive angler. And he says, when you go into the shop, everybody asks, hey, what flies are they hitting on? And his perspective was, they're going to eat flies. Whatever. That's most of these flies in here are commercially made to make you feel good about how they look, not the fish. And he said, instead of asking that question, ask the question, where are the fish at? Are they in the riffles? Are they in the pools? Are they deep? Are they surfing? Are they up high, etc.? And, again, I think it falls right into play with what you were talking about of like, hey, I guide the river. I usually have a good understanding of where the fish are. And so that's where I'm going to adjust to be, my sacrificial areas or non-sacrificial areas, et cetera. So
yeah, exactly. There's a couple sections where it's, a little bit of frog water, and we'll blow through that, keep your flies in, but we'll blow through that because we want to get down to good water. I don't want to waste time where I know there's not going to be, chances are low.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. And so now we talked about the mending side regarding nymphing, but there's from the boat, there's some different tactics as well for both the streamer side and the dry fly side. Why don't you jump into one of those?
So with streamers, what I'll do with clients is I have them, we'll cast out about a 45 from the boat. And I've gotten away with clients from using flies that only work with specific retrieves. Sometimes that's just too much for some people. So I've gotten into like a barely legal's like a great fly, a great streamer. You can use any retrieve you want with that. And I just tell them, just mix it up, do some short strips, one, pop, let it rest, pop. And that's a great fly. So I'll have them cast out and either, we'll start when I'm working these big pulls, have them cast out and then, all right, start stripping. Then, all right, now cast out just a little bit further down, let it sink, give it a second, let it sink down. Now start stripping. All right, now cast to the same spot, but let it drift down a little bit even more. Let it swing down. And then we work our way through the whole water like that until we're eventually letting it swing all the way down to, down towards the front of us. And that's how we cover that water. We make sure we cover every inch of that water with using every possible scenario we can.
Yeah. And are you anchoring up at times and kind of gridding out your cast like that? Or is it more moving, or I'm assuming a combination of both as well?
Yeah, there's a couple sections where I'll drop the anchor and we'll work on that. We'll cast that out and I'll just slowly let rope out. And the boat will slowly move down, but we're still anchored up. I won't get towards the end of the rope, pull the anchor up, and we move down a little bit and finish the other section by doing that again. And that we get through there. I am super confident we've covered that water and every inch of it. And then there's other sections where we have some tribs that dump in with some big water. Where I'm rowing and it's too much. You can't really drop anchor in there. It's too dangerous and all that stuff. So we're just hammering the banks, as fast as you can, hammering the banks, give me a few strips in, recast, and that's
right.
That gets crazy sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And it could be
It is
exhilarating too. You're up there, you got the guy who's standing up making the cast, and it's like, okay, hit that color line, hit that color line. All right, now the bottom side of it where it's coming out, and see that eddy over there, get in the eddy and rip it out of there.
That's exactly how it goes.
And some of my favorite streamer fishing is, and then when you get a big old strike on one of those guys and it's in fast water and you're moving and all of a sudden tip up. We got, that's some of the best fishing I can imagine.
That's a lot of fun, especially for my clients that are new to streamer fishing, because that's not a subtle take. They hammer that.
No.
It's on, and it immediately, and just don't let there be any slack.
Yeah, and it's the thing that's really kind of different about it and exhilarating is you get that thud. You feel like I got the set, or you're like, oh man, I felt it, but it wasn't a really great set. But then you're also I'm on really heavy tippet, so I can usually really yard on this thing and get this thing, keep that tension tight. And you're back there probably as a guy going, get it tight, keep it tight. Don't worry, you're not going to break them off. You're not going to break them off.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Cool. They get real excited. Clients get real excited with that, and then if they hook up, get into one like that, I get us over into the little bit slower water where I can drop the anchor, and then we can work on bringing it in,
controlling it,
and that's a lot of fun because if they have it on, they have a tight line on there. Confident we're bringing it to the boat. Because that leader's not going to break.
Right. And you can talk about some of those other scenarios of how to land a fish with a little more calmness, right? Because when you're on 5X and you got a good fish on and you're like, oh man, this guy's bringing it towards the boat, the oar's out of the way, is the fish going to go under the boat, etc. It's a totally different scenario than when you're on a streamer line with heavy tippet and you're like, okay, yeah, bring him in, get his head up, all those things.
Kind of funny you mentioned that. I just had somebody where I think they lost 3 fish because they were trying to, on 5X, trying to muscle it in. Well, that snaps off, and so we talk about, playing the fish, letting the fish get out all the energy it needs to get out so we can bring it to the net. We want to keep that line tight, whichever side, want to keep the rod tip up a little bit at an angle. And, we just bring it. If it needs to run, let some line out, but keep that line tight.
Yeah.
And then, when he's ready, we'll bring him in. And like you said, when they're getting close to the boat, we got that real long boat net. So, you want to try and, all right, you're going to bring, what I tell them is you're going to bring the head up. I'm coming underneath with a net and we're going to take a picture. If you want to take your picture quick and back in the water, But if you're working with 5X, stuff like that, and, you don't want to muscle it too much, it's kind of a fine line between letting go too much and pulling too hard. And that's just something that comes with experience. Some people get a little excited, and I get it. I'm excited too, But we need to do everything right here. Make sure we're going to bring this trout in so we can all smile.
Yeah, exactly. Get that memorable shot and go home and tell the family the story about the one that was 18 that looked like it was 28.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, cool, man. Bill, it was really good to have you on the show. Enjoyed learning about your tips and techniques and whatnot. And so, before we break, Bill, how can people get a hold of you, get on a trip with you?
People can reach out to me on my website at www.patroutfitters.fish. Or you can hit me up a message on Instagram at PA_troutfitters. Or you can shoot me an email at patroutfitters@gmail.com.
Okay, great. And then your information will be in the show notes, so you can get a hold of Bill through that as well. And or if you have any questions, I can put you in contact with him. So thanks again, Bill. It was great having you on the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You got it.